How's it going, everyone? Savi from Mother SpongeBob. Today is March 14th, 2021, and today we're going to do an analysis on the amount of dry air that could be in the Atlantic for this hurricane season, as well as the amount of Saharan dust that could be in the Atlantic for this hurricane season. But before I begin, make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather content. Make sure to like if you like this video. Make sure to turn on post notifications if you want to see even more weather content. So this is a continuation of a multi-part series I'm doing, analysis, pretty much analyzing the hurricane season as a whole, every factor that could change the amount of hurricanes or tropical cyclones that could form, and one of the main factors includes the amount of dry air in the Atlantic. So first, we're going to take a look at the current Saharan air layer, or the Saharan dust layer, as many would call it, and pretty much the Saharan dust layer is pretty much an area in the atmosphere where there's just, of course, a lot of dust, but it's also very dry, and that typically inhibits tropical cyclone development because, for one thing, is that, of course, tropical cyclones do not like dry air. It really pretty much inhibits any sort of convection going on in the atmosphere, and it pretty much dries up a lot of the water vapor in the atmosphere, or at least diverts a lot of the water vapor back into other areas outside of the center of circulation. So that's one reason why dry air why the Saharan dust layer is considered to be very which inhibits tropical cyclone development. And another thing is that typically when there's a Saharan dust layer, there's typically strong winds in the middle levels of the atmosphere. So it's easy for the dust layer to shear off any sort of cloud tops or any sort of center of circulation in the mid levels of the atmosphere, which typically slows down tropical cyclone development in general. And you see this is a current dust layer throughout the most of the Atlantic, and pretty much the oranges represent drier air, more dust, and you see that throughout a lot of Africa, just off the coast. You see that the Saharan dust layer is pretty much swallowing up the entire main development region. So it's not uncommon for the Saharan dust layer to completely swallow up the main development region this early in the season, mainly because the winds typically this early in the season come very far from begin very far southward, and it's not until like the main part of the hurricane season, or the worst part of the hurricane season, in the months like August and September, where we do see those easterly winds move just far enough north to really leave the main development region out in the clear when it comes to the Saharan dust layer. So it isn't very untypical we're seeing this dust layer right now. However, last year in June 2020, we just saw a huge dust storm pretty much swallow up the not only the entire main development region, but the Caribbean as well, where they were experiencing just where they were just experiencing an abundance of Saharan dust, where it became dangerous at times for some sensitive individuals in the Caribbean. Thankfully, it isn't forecasted to be at that level, as last year was a major anomaly, especially since it was during a La Nina pattern, which is very untypical for Saharan dust to expand that wide during a La Nina season. However, this season it doesn't seem likely we're going to see that extent of the Saharan desert completely swallow up the Caribbean. However, we still could see enough dry air for a lot of the beginning of the season and extending to the Caribbean, where it could hinder a lot of well, I wouldn't say a lot, but it could hinder some tropical cyclone development for the near future, which is certainly some good news. We do not want to see an early season like we've been seeing for multiple times over the past couple of years. And you see, this is a current forecast when it comes to the Saharan dust layer, and you see that the forecast is bringing a lot of that Saharan dust closer to the Caribbean. So that definitely could mean that over at least the short-term future, tropical cyclone development in the Caribbean should be limited for now, I should say. And So this might be the first time in years where in the month of May we do not experience tropical cyclone development. However, it's still far too early. We're still in the middle of May, and this forecast only extends to right around this weekend. So this is a very short term forecast. However, if we take a look at even more long term forecasts, it's still more likely than not that Saharan desert air will linger around the Caribbean. So for any short term tropical cyclones, it seems less likely at this point because dry air is just going to swallow a lot of the Caribbean. However, maybe the Gulf of Mexico, we could see some early tropical cyclone development depending on how far east the Saharan desert air goes. But for the Caribbean, it seems like it's going to be limited by a lot of the Saharan dust that's going to be located right over the Caribbean. Now, and another thing that we need to take a look at to determine how much dry air will be in the Atlantic for this hurricane season, especially during the main part of the hurricane season. We also need to take a look at climatology computer models because they give a good idea of where exactly it'll be more drier than average or more moist than average. And it's really helpful to use these because computer models pretty much synthesize a bunch of information and compares it to situations in the past that were very similar. So that way it's more accurate to use climatology levels than let's say just speculation based off what is happening right now. And you see that over the next month for the month of June, you see that for the most part, a lot of dry air is swallowing up a lot of Caribbean, and we see an abundance of dry air right in this region as well. And I suspect a lot of the reason why is because of the Saharan desert air that's gonna move into the Caribbean. So that could mean a more drier than typical June for a lot of the main development region, at least in the month of June, which is the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico. So that could mean that June might be a quieter month when it comes to tropical cyclone development. However, again, this is all speculation based on the amount of dry air. There could easily be a tropical cyclone that forms in the month of June, but when we see more dry air, it's less likely that that will exactly happen. But I'd say based off of history, even despite the amount of dry air we're seeing, it's still more likely than not we will see at least something or some tropical cyclone um, form in June, more likely than not, especially since the sea surface temperatures and the wind shear will certainly be favorable for at least one tropical cyclone to form in the month of June. However, it becomes less likely when we see more dry air that multiple storms could form, which is basically my main point with making these forecasts. That this is all speculation, but when it and it could easily be wrong, but knowing this at least gives a better probability of what will happen, but do not at all take it as 100% truth. But moving on to the month of July, you see that the dry air does continue to linger throughout the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico. So the good news is that this could certainly limit tropical cyclone development for the months of June and July. So despite maybe having less than typical wind shear or higher above average sea temperatures, the thing that might be on our side for the months of June and July will be the dry air right around the areas where tropical cyclones typically form in the month of July, which is right around the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean islands. And taking a look at Africa, we do see a lot of moisture on the southern side of this storm, on the southern side of Africa. However, in the main development region, it's mainly average when it comes to precipitation, if not drier than average. So I suspect there should be some Saharan desert air moving over the main development region. However, I do expect that to change once the monsoon winds moves a little bit further northward, and it pretty much forces a lot of that Saharan desert air further northward as the southern portion becomes more moist and too moist for any major Well, I wouldn't say too moist, but the winds move too far up north for a lot of the Saharan desert air to have any major effects on, let's say, the main development region. But moving on to the month of August, you see that the dry air lingers over the main development region, but we do see moisture just off the coast of Africa. We do see a little bit more moisture right around the Caribbean, and we see mainly average precipitation throughout the Gulf of Mexico. Based off of the amount of dry air that's forecast in the main development region, this is something we want to see because maybe this could limit tropical cyclone development if there's more dry air in this region, in the main development region, which is where 85% of major hurricanes form, which is quite an amazing stat that I just found out today. But that is true that the main development region is responsible for 85% of major hurricanes. So when we do see an area of dry air right in the heart of the main development region, that could hopefully limit the amount of tropical cyclones that could form in this region due to the amount of dry air. However, it could be however, we do see more moist than average conditions throughout the Caribbean, so we could see tropical cyclone development in this region. However, I'd say I'd rather have more moist than average conditions in the Caribbean than the main development region, where majority of tropical cyclones do form during the worst part of the hurricane season. So this could certainly limit it, but we're still a couple months away. This could easily change. So we need to at least keep in mind. But I suspect the Saharan desert air should be well up to the north to not affect the main development region at this point, and we do see some moisture off the coast of Africa. So more moisture than average. So this could mean more troughs than average will move through the main development region and pretty much mitigate the fact that there's drier than average conditions throughout the main development region. We just have to wait and see. There's a lot to synthesize over the next couple of weeks, and then here we go in the month of September, and this becomes concerning in the month of September because we do see the main development region become more moist than average and have this little small area of more precipitation than usual, which could mean that more troughs will eventually strengthen into tropical storms or hurricanes, and this could certainly set the stage for a more active hurricane season if the main development region is this moist. However, the good news is that a lot of the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico is expected to be drier than average, at least for now. So that could limit the chances of any sort of major hurricanes moving through the area and could weaken some tropical cyclones that move through this area if the air is too dry. However, again, take it with a grain of salt. We're still a couple months away. But certainly right now, when it comes to dry air, I'd say for a lot of this hurricane season, there's going to be a good amount of areas that are going to be in the drier than average zone. However, it gets concerning when we do see more moist than average conditions in the main development region in September. And moving on to October, we do see that the main development region is pretty much flip flop, pretty much where we do see drier than average conditions just off the coast of Africa and more moist than average conditions right around the just to the west, I mean to the east of the Caribbean islands. However, during the month of October, that's typically when the main development region is limited when it comes to tropical cyclone development, as majority of tropical cyclone development happens right around the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean islands during the month of October. And you see that throughout the Caribbean, there's a good area of more moist than average conditions and this extends to the Gulf of Mexico. While we do see drier than average conditions right around this region, it isn't as likely, I'd say, for tropical cyclones to develop in this region, mainly because the wind shear is always a little bit too strong in this specific region. So when we do see that moisture more focused in the Gulf of Mexico and Caribbean, that gets concerning for the month of October. So we need to keep close on that. And then in November, while the hurricane season is pretty much done, we still do see some tropical cyclones. So I might as well point it out. You see that there's a lot of dry air for the Gulf of Mexico, which is good news, but more moist than average conditions right around the main development region during the month of November. So that could be concerning, but for the most part, the heart of the hurricane season should be in September and October, where we do see in the areas where most tropical cyclones form be a little bit more moist than average, which is certainly concerning. But we just need to wait and see what exactly happens because there's still a lot of uncertainty. In terms of the drought monitor, right around the Caribbean islands, I decided to take a look right around Puerto Rico, and you see that in Puerto Rico, there you guys are in a slight drought, which is certainly which certainly might be good news that maybe the Caribbean is currently in a little bit of a drought, which could which could increase the chance of dry air that could inhibit tropical cyclone development. However, it isn't a drought that I'd call major since there's still a lot of time for that to change. And in terms of the United States drought monitor, unfortunately, a lot of the eastern half of the United States, well, I shouldn't say unfortunately because a drought is certainly bad, but when it comes to hurricane season, you typically would want a drought closer to where hurricanes actually do form because that would limit the amount of hurricane landfalls typically or the amount of tropical cyclone development when there's more dry air. However, it's clear that most of dry air is centered toward the eastern half of the United States, so it's less likely that the dry air would be able to move into the Gulf of Mexico to inhibit tropical cyclone development. And another thing we need to take a look at is the Arctic oscillation because that could maybe steer that dry air in the western half of the United States the to the Atlantic with jet stream dips. However, the pattern, while it's negative right now, it's concerning that it's expected to be back. I expect it to be back to positive eventually, maybe during the heart of a hurricane season, let's say in August. So that could limit the chance of dry air moving into a lot of the Atlantic. But we need to wait and see because forecasting the Atlantic oscillation is very dry, is very difficult. So take my speculation with a huge grain of salt. But since we've been in negative phase for quite some time, I find it unlikely that it's going to continue all hurricane season. So I do expect it to get unfortunately back in the positive phase during the worst time possible during the peak of the hurricane season. And in terms of sea surface temperatures, it's more moist than average throughout the Atlantic, so that might offset the fact that maybe the air is more dry because when the sea surface temperatures are more warm, that typically induces just more a humid environment. So that could limit the amount of dry air, which is unfortunate. And in terms of the dry air from the west coast moving into the Atlantic, it seems unlikely, mainly because we're going to be sort of in a neutral to La Nina phase, and that doesn't particularly bring stable air or very dry air to the Atlantic since a lot of the sinking air is going to be located just right around the west coast and the Pacific overall. And since the sea surface temperatures are well below average, just off the Pacific US coast, it's less likely we're going to see low pressures or a major monsoon bring a lot of that dry air to the Atlantic. So, as a result, I do expect more likely than not the Atlantic to be slightly more humid than average, but I wouldn't say it's going to be so humid to where it'll induce a higher chance of tropical cyclone development. However, I do expect it to be right around average when it comes to the amount of dry air because while I do expect, while based off of the computer models, based off of the computer models, it is expected to be, I'd say, sort of a mix when it comes to dry air and moist air in the main development regions in the Atlantic. However, it might be offset by the fact that the sea surface temperatures in the Atlantic will be warmer than average for a lot of this year, so it might be more humid, and also we're more likely to be in a neutral to La Nina phase, which will bring more unstable air to the to the Atlantic. So as a result, I do expect it to be a little bit more humid than average for this time of the year, for the 2020 hurricane season, which will induce a little bit more hurricanes than usual for this year. So yeah, guys, I guess that's it for this video. I thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather, guys. And make sure to like if you like this video. Make sure to turn on post notifications if you want to see even more weather content. And I hope you guys have a good day.